What's going on, guys? Chris here again. Welcome back to another video. If you are new to this channel, which probably a lot of you are because I don't usually review a lot of Canon gear, I primarily shoot Sony cameras and I have been for the last 4 or 5 years. But I've come to a place where I feel like I don't really care about brands at all. I used to be sponsored by Sony and I left the Advocate program just because, it wasn't really doing anything for me. I still shoot Sony, but I wanted to have a really non-biased look on every kind of gear I could get my hands on. So today I'm reviewing the EOS R5 and a bunch of lenses I had with it. So it's definitely better than I thought it was going to be. I'm pretty impressed. So stay tuned and check out the video. So first of all, a shout out to Canon New Zealand and to Auckland Camera Centre for hooking me up with all this gear. So at first when we approached Canon, they were sort of a little bit dubious about why I wanted to review the Canon EOS R5. Being a Sony shooter, maybe they thought I was just doing it to kind of trash the system or something, which is not the case. Despite all that, they went ahead and gave me 2 Canon EOS R5s, the 15 to 35, which I'm filming on now, the little 35mm 1.8, the 50mm 1.2, and this gigantic 28 to 70 f2. So I have a pretty full kit, and I've been doing a little bit of professional work with it, just mucking around and just testing it out, putting it through its paces. I felt like I wanted to give it a really solid review rather than just getting my hands on, which I've already tried these cameras a bunch of times. So I've had these for just over a week now, and I've done a few professional shoots with them. I've mucked around with them at home, done a little bit of video. And yeah, I'm really impressed. So let's get into it and I'll tell you guys if I can recommend this camera or not. So first we're going to talk about build quality and how it feels in the hand. And a lot of you guys, like I said, you have to remember I'm talking about coming from Sony systems. So right now I'm on 2 A7R4s and I have a bunch of the prime lenses which I use for my main kit. You can check another video out about my whole kit and another video. I'll put a link in the description. So I'm going to be comparing it a little bit to my Sony gear, but I do want it to be a kind of standalone review. So how it feels in the hand, it's really nice to hold actually, even without a grip for my finger. I do have quite large hands, and even without a grip, it's plenty comfortable enough to hold. I mean, these big lenses do make it feel very kind of front heavy, but I wouldn't buy this 28 to 70 personally. It's just not the kind of lens I use. I really love this 35mm 1.8, so let me chuck that on now and see. Actually, that's one thing I like before I put the lens on. The Sony cameras, when you take the lens off, it doesn't cover the sensor, so you can have dust issues. I don't really have dust issues. I know a lot of other people talk about it. So I don't know, it's not really been a big deal for me. I've only cleaned my camera sensors once and they don't have any dust on them at the moment. I check them regularly because I do a lot of video. But the R5 cameras, and I think the R6 and all the other ones they do, when you take the lens off, it shuts the camera sensor, so you're not getting dust on it, which is really great. I really appreciate that feature, and I think Sony should definitely be implementing that. So as you can see with the 35mm, it's a really nice little compact, lightweight, really ergonomic feeling camera. In terms of the actual grip itself, I do prefer my Sony A7R4 grips. They're a little bit deeper and a little bit nicer to hold. I think if you had smaller hands or like normal size hands, both would feel really fantastic in the hands. The one thing I prefer with the Canon over the Sony is the angle of the shutter button. So the way it's angled, it's sort of facing forwards, where the Sony is more on top. So this one definitely feels a little bit more natural to hold. You kind of have your thing like that rather than on top like that, which definitely prefer that on the Canon. The top screen, I'm not really a fan of. I can't say I've ever looked at it to see what I was doing. I always just check what's going on the screen or in the viewfinder. And all the dials and everything, the buttons are all nice and clicky and really have a real nice tactile feel to them. So no complaints with the build quality at all. I will note the Canon EOS R5. If I was going to buy a Canon, I would be buying the R5, mostly because I'm a professional and I shoot in all weathers regardless of what's going on. If it's a wedding and it's raining, I have to shoot anyway. And the R6 isn't weather sealed like the R5, so just something to note. One thing with the build of the Canon cameras, I really am not a fan of this tilt-out screen. I don't like having it. I shoot like hip shoot a lot with the screen folded out, and obviously on the Sony cameras it just folds out straight. It's not hanging off to the side here. I feel like I could quite easily break this off. You know, it's well built, but it is something that is just hanging off there, and I'm really not a fan of that. And I don't like having to look to the side when I'm shooting. I like to have everything centered. I am being fussy, but these are usability things that matter to me. Obviously for my YouTube videos, like I'm filming on the R5 now, I can see myself, but usually I'm using my Atomos Ninja V to, you know, I have that on top of my camera and I'm recording through that anyway, so it's not really a big deal. But for run and gun shooting and vlogging, this is obviously going to be really fantastic. But for me, I prefer having the fold out screen. It's really a personal preference. The AF on button, I do use back button focus, and the AF on button is a little bit small for my big fat fingers, but it's fine, it's in the right place, and the joystick is really fantastic. Moving the focus point around is definitely faster on the Canon than it is on the Sony. With the Sony, it's just not laggy, but it just works a little bit better with the Canon one. So all in all, really fantastic. No real complaints that I can think of. The only minor gripe I would say is that it's a little bit more difficult to change the mode. So if you're going from AV to manual or shutter speed priority, or you want to go into video, it takes a couple of extra steps, where on a Sony it just has that physical dial to change it, and it's just a little bit quicker. But yeah, again, a really minor thing. The last thing on build quality is the storage option. So you have a UHS 2 SD card slot, and then you have a CF Express card slot. So you do have dual backup options, which is great. The only thing is CF Express cards are obviously way better, they're way faster, more reliable, but they are heaps more expensive. And I have to use dual card slots. I'm never going to use just one slot for a wedding. So, you know, I'd have to be upgrading my cards for that. But when I upgraded to my A7R4s, I had to upgrade my cards anyway. And even UHS 2, you know, fast, large storage, like 128 gig SD cards are still really expensive anyway. So it's not really a deal breaker, and I would rather have CF Express if I had the option. Now, before we get into image quality, I want to touch on the focus system, because that's one of the things that really stands out, not as being bad, but it's very, very different to how the Sony focus system works, in particular with iFocus and tracking. So with the Canon, the focus performance is fantastic. So track like how fast it focuses, how snappy it is, how accurate it is. It's really great. I never really had any times where I missed shots because of focus issues. The only difference is Sony has the real-time tracking, which is just really, really amazing. So I'll put it on the screen so you can see it for yourself, but you kind of just half press, shoot, you just kind of like grab your subject, and then you can move your camera around and it just tracks it anywhere. And the difference with the iFocus system on Canon is you can't really choose which face you want to focus on. So say you're photographing a group of people from, you know, maybe like 6 or 7 people, and they're not all standing in a line, and it's a little bit more difficult to choose. You kind of have to either use the touchscreen to select a person, and then it tracks it fine, but I don't really like using touchscreen. I usually have it disabled on my Sonys because I'm always hitting it with my nose and moving the focus point around. Otherwise, you just press the iFocus button, which I have programmed to the little star one on the back here, and then you can tap the joystick to go through and choose different faces, but it is much, much slower in terms of selecting the face that you want. Saying that though, most of the time, like in sunset shoots at a wedding, I'm only shooting 2 people, and you know, the way I shoot, which is quite wide usually, it doesn't tend to really matter which face I'm focusing on, and if it's not doing what I want it to do, I can just, you know, resort back to the single point focus and move the joystick around, which is really easy. I do definitely prefer the Sony focus system and the real-time tracking, particularly, you know, I'm only really talking on the newer cameras like the R4, A7S III, A9 Mark II, A9 even Mark I. They all have real-time tracking. The older cameras don't. So, you know, it's going to be down to you. But the other thing I want to touch on with the focus is if you're coming from a Canon SLR or a Nikon SLR or any SLR, and you've never tried Sony and you go to these R5s, the focus is hugely improved. So it's not like you're getting a lesser focus system. It's still fantastic. And coming from any DSLR, to, you know, if you're moving to mirrorless, if you're coming from a 5D4 to the R5, the focus system is miles better, and you're going to be really, really impressed with it. So I don't think it's going to let you down. The video focus as well is amazing. I would say it's about the same as my R4 with the, you know, they both have iFocus and video. They both track fantastic. They're both smooth in terms of transitions. and yeah, the focus for video works really well on the R5 and the R6. Now when talking about sensor stabilization, the R5, I feel like it's slightly better than my A7R4. It does have a little bit of a twitchy kind of feel to it, but in terms of like walking along, it's a little bit more stable than I find with my A7R4s. Again, both of them are really fantastic in terms of stabilization, so no complaints. But yeah, I do feel like the Canon R5 has a slight edge over the R4 in terms of sensor stabilization. Another thing I really enjoy about the Canons is the LCD screen and the viewfinder. They're both really great. The A7R4 viewfinder is just as good, I think, but the rear screen on the Canon is definitely better. Other than the fold out, you know, like I said, I don't like that, but the screen quality is definitely better than the Sony. So Sony have really needed to up their game with the rear LCD screens on their cameras for a while now. So hopefully the new generation ones will do that. But I feel like I've been saying that for a couple of years now. So really appreciate the better LCD screen on the Canon. I have tried the R6, but like I said, this review is about the R5, and this is the camera I would buy if I was changing to Canon or upgrading my 5Ds or whatever. The image quality out of these cameras is really, really great. It's better than anything else I've seen from Canon. I've tried all the cameras in the past, and the R5 is fantastic. It has very slightly less dynamic range than my Sony, so on my Sonys I can pull back the highlights a little bit more, but low light in these is fantastic, really sharp photos, really nice colors. The color skin tone thing, honestly, I really don't get it. I know a lot of you guys are going to hate me for that comment, but whatever, it is what it is. When I'm editing my files, I've already done a video, you can see that, a comparison video in a real wedding. My second shooter was on these, and I was on my R4s, and after editing, they're really not much different. The Sony images looked a little bit sharper, but that's probably because they were 62 megapixels or whatever, whereas these are about 45. But the colors are great on both cameras, really. I honestly don't have a complaint with either of them. The Canons do have a slightly softer feel to them. It's not like the image is soft, like they're unsharp, but they do have a softer kind of glowy feel to them, depending on the lens you use. But all these ones I've tested are really fantastic. Now in terms of hybrid shooting, because as you guys know, if you don't, I shoot photo and video at the same time at weddings, and the Canon R5 is really the way to go. The R6, as far as I'm aware, and I tried to do it, you can't set it up the same way, but the R5 is really fast if you want to do hybrid shooting. So really you can just fire off a bunch of shots, and then almost instantly you can just press the record button and start recording video in the setup you have, which I'll go over in a second, and have really, you know, it has a really great buffer. So with the Sony, you kind of have to wait maybe like 3 seconds. With the R4s, if you burst off a whole bunch of shots, maybe 2 seconds, not a whole lot of time, but you do have to wait a little bit longer before you can press the record button because of that buffer. So for hybrid shooting, it's really fantastic. With the R5, what I did was you can set C3 to any video settings you want. So I have it set to AV, Canon C-Log, 1080p at 50 frames per second. And when you press the record button without changing modes, it does go into that C3 mode. So really great way to go about shooting video there. Not quite as much dynamic range again as shooting an S-Log2 or S-Log3 in the Sony cameras. But yeah, still fantastic, really impressed with it. Now let me touch on a few things that I'm not a real fan of. Nothing major, honestly, but the HDMI port, I'm not really a fan of where it is, because if you have the screen out and the HDMI plugged into it, which I do use for my Ninja V, you can't really tilt the screen down, you know, without it kind of getting in the way. So overall, guys, I can easily recommend these cameras to anyone coming from a 5D, or, you know, if you want to switch from Nikon or Sony or whatever. They're a fantastic camera. The major thing for me is the price. So with Sony, I feel like you're getting the same kind of features. Some are a little bit better, some are not quite as good, but you're paying a lot less for the same kind of features on Sony, especially with the lenses. A lot of the lenses are a lot cheaper as well. So you are paying more to get into this ecosystem, but you know, if you put price aside, it's a little bit difficult to say that, but if you put price aside, I can definitely recommend the Canon EOS R5. It's a great camera, and definitely the most impressive camera that I've seen from Canon in 10 years probably. You know, the 5D2 came out, and that was a bit of a game changer in terms of video and just in general for the market. But since then, I didn't really feel like they'd done anything amazing. But overall, I feel like it's a really fantastic camera, and I can easily recommend it. No major downsides. You know, I could talk talk about video overheating, which it does do, but really not in all options. If you're shooting 1080, which I do at weddings, it's totally fine. So in this video, I'm shooting in 4K 25p, but not with the HQ settings, because I find with HQ, the high quality 4K, it does overheat. So, you know, that's fine. And it overheats a little bit in 60p when you're doing a lot of clips, which just makes it a little unreliable. But you really just have to weigh up what kind of video features you need for your use case scenario. So anyway, thanks for watching, guys. I really appreciate you following along. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for following along.